at any time. And you're seeing emails from him as well. We got some new email engagement that we're pushing out to y'all. So again, welcome to this month's webinar on varietal honey production. And I am James Wilkes. All right, let's see. There we go. So today's agenda, as I said, it's pretty packed. I'm going to give you an update as usual from my own operation and what's been going on in the last month. Talk briefly about what you might be doing right now on Hive Tracks, as far as with the app, plus your own beekeeping. And then, yeah, go through the varietal honey production primer. And there's a lot to go over, and we're just going to be hitting the highlights. I've spoken on this before, even on a webinar, and given talks at bee clubs about varietal honey production, specifically about sourwood, because that's what I'm most familiar with. But yeah, we'll have fun talking about that. Got a couple of honey story examples from this season for you, and then a pretty extensive QA list that you all sent. I appreciate that. And we'll see if we how many we have time for. Some of those will be answered as we go through this. But again, any questions you have as we go, drop them in the chat. I'll try to glance there every once in a while, or Franco will as well. And so here we go. So for Faith Mountain Farm, and if you're not familiar, I've got a sideliner operation, about 60 hives right now. And in the last month, we actually have two varietal flows, appropriately enough, going on at the same time. And one of those is sourwood and the other is basswood, depending on the geography of where I put my hives, which we'll talk about. So sourwood is the big story this year in North Carolina. It was a really good sourwood season. It started a little bit early and was pretty steady for a solid 3 weeks at least. For me, basswood was super short and intense, and then I've got several yards that are left to assess. Had several challenges in the last month. I don't know if you had the heat waves where you are. Some of you right now in the middle of the country in the U.S. are under that heat dome. It was over us back in around July 4th. Also had bears, swarms, invasive nectars. So again, it's not all roses and good nectar flows, but all the normal stuff that we have with beekeeping. So this is a look from my sourwood yard yesterday. We're wrapping up the season. You see a few stacks of hives there. Those are on bee escapes, where I'm harvesting the last of this honey. I think there's 15 hives in this picture. There's some other hives off to the side. Um, and this is, if you're not familiar with this graph, this is a graph of scale, a hive weight. This is a solution B scale, and I've used these over the years. And if you've seen any of my presentations, you'll recognize this graph. And you see that it started right around the 20th of June and was started leveling out about the 12th or 13th. On the end of this flow, we got a little bit of a rainy period, so it kind of cut it short for us. But again, you can see in the middle there that escalation in weight. Right around July 4th, we had a pretty intense heat wave, and it actually changed the structure. This is a whole nother thing to investigate of what the scale shows in that case. But anyway, you can see this was a good season, 124 to 244 pounds in this window of time here, 120 pounds on this particular hive. And this is that hive. And one of the things we'll talk about when we get to varietal honey production is location. Elevation for sourwood is one of the factors in production. This particular location was at 1294 or so. And here's the hive. This is the hive that's on that scale. And I'll talk more about that. So that was one of my yards. I've got a almost duplicate picture from a different yard. And this is a few hives that I have in that yard. You can see the one with the green and the yellow in the back. That hive has a particular name. Its name is Noah. It survived the Hurricane Helene flood here at my farm and has actually been alive since then and was one of the most productive hives in this particular yard. Again, the scale here goes from 138 to 200, almost 280, 140 pounds. There's a super or a couple of supers in there in the middle. So not all that is honey, of course, but again, very nice production out of that. This is a look at that yard, 1381 elevation. This is that hive. You can see that I still write on the hives, so that's part of my management in addition to using hive tracks. On the right is the sourwood honey that we got out of the end of this. We're still extracting and all that, but it is beautiful this year, both in terms of its color and its flavor, just exquisite. So that varietal has turned out really well. This is basswood. If you look on the left, if you recognize the basswood blooms on the trees, they're very recognizable in the canopy. The hive on the right here, the one with the brown super in the middle, that's the productive hive. The other one swarmed and was requeening during this whole time. One of those hazards of trying to make varietal honey. And here I've got, I won't spend too much time here, but this is a new monitoring system that one of my colleagues at App State it has developed, and it's called BMON. And in the screenshot on the far left, you can see that blue hive. See how fast that went up. That particular hive put on 40 pounds in about 4 or 5 days. It was just very intense. And you can see in the other two, this is a before and after. It went from 96 pounds to 184 pounds. So again, huge production in a very short window of time for the basswood. So those are two of the kind of production pieces that I've been able to look at so far. I've got a bunch of other yards that are would be more mountain wildflower. It's going to be a mix of basswood and other things. Um, then the hazards. Well, was it hot anytime this month where you are? It was definitely hot, especially around July 4th. This hive on the left, I was getting ready to harvest from this hive, and this is what it looked like. It had those top three supers on there were packed full of honey. So the bees really had nowhere to go to even get cool, so they all piled out. And then in the middle, this is a bear turning over a hive. Actually, you can see that it's on a scale as well. Thankfully, it was strapped, so the bear just knocked it over and moved on, didn't tear it up, thankfully. Then on the right, again, anytime you're, um, you know, trying to produce honey, I don't know if you can see on the screen, but there are piles of eggs in those cells. So that hive just went south and developed a lane worker, and that lane worker went crazy in laying eggs just in a few cells. It was a really weak hive. So again, that's kind of what the season's been like around here um, for the last month. And I don't know about you as well. This is the super busy time. Somebody I forgot your name already. They're extracting honey right now while they're watching this webinar, and I've got a basement full of honey that needs to be extracted. So right now, what do you need to do in the app? Well, if you've done those harvests, make sure that you enter the data for your harvest. One thing that I've started doing is when I harvest in the yard, I'll create a harvest honey record for it there and just say, depending on how you're harvesting, is it full supers at a time or frames at a time? I'll just give an estimate, 4 medium supers. And then when I go and extract, if I'm able to, I'll come back and I'll update that record with the actual amount of honey that we netted from that. So again, put in your honey harvest. That's important for your honey stories that you're going to create. And this is a great time to say, if you haven't made a honey story, what are you waiting on? It's there. Even if you don't have the pro version, go sign up. It's free for 30 days and get in there, look at the Hive Tracks Pro and build you a honey story, see what it looks like. Other things that we're doing right now, I think everybody, whether you are aware of it or not, need to be Looking forward to winter, and a big piece of that is getting your bees healthy and Varroa free as much as you can, or at least Varroa managing. And so monitoring, and if you're treating or doing some other mechanical methods for Varroa control, then yeah, you need to be recording that. A lot of times after harvesting this time of year, the bees are going to be hungry. They got a big forage force still. And so just be mindful of that. You might need to feed. And then always document what's blooming and the pollinators that are around, because that helps you as a beekeeper and the broader community. I love taking pictures of pollinators on flowers. These are just a few, even from the last few days. I grow sunflower, cut sunflowers, and then this anise in the middle. That's just a wildflower I've got. And then on the right is echinacea or coneflower. And yeah, don't forget to do that part of hive tracks. Okay, quick break right there. So that's what's going on, what you should be doing. Again, if you got questions, feel free to pop them in the chat. And now we're going to move into this section on varietal honey production. And let me preface that by saying, so me personally, I've been beekeeping since the year 2000, so 26-ish years. And since about 2007, I've really been chasing the sourwood honey and you know, trying to produce a varietal honey in sourwood. And so I've been paying attention to this space and learning from experience and learning from others. And so that's where this is coming from on varietal honey production. So the key elements for varietal honey production, which by the way, producing varietal honey is no different than producing any other honey. So it's just when you focus on a particular variety, there are a few other things that you need to pay attention to if you want to specifically go for varietal. But everything I'm saying here is important to just honey production in general, right? And so just applying it to a particular bloom or particular variety is what we're talking about here. So what are the key elements? Healthy bees are number one. So if you need healthy bees before any of this makes sense, and then we'll talk about how does location play into it, the timing, what are the processes, what's different than just normal honey production, and then at the end of the day, how do I even validate that this is a varietal or verify that it's a varietal? A lot of questions around that as well. So we're going to touch on those. And again, this is a very broad subject that's got a lot of nuance to it. I'm going to hit the highlights. And as with all beekeeping answers, it depends is a common refrain when we're talking about varietal honey production. So before we get too far, what is a varietal honey? What do we mean by varietal honey? Other names for it is monofloral, single flower source, unifloral. The concept is, can we get a honey that comes from a specific flower? As a beekeeper, you know the bees are going to go out and they're going to forage on whatever they run into, whatever source that they find and that they like. They're going to tell all the other bees about it, and those bees are going to go to that nectar source and get it as well. And so, how in the world do you even get a varietal, one single source honey? The answer is you don't necessarily. And in fact, what's going to happen is you're always going to have a little bit of mixture in there. And every honey that's produced, every drop is unique. Okay. Every drop from your hive at the time and location and your beekeeping practices and the strength of your hive, dictates what honey they make. And that is unique, different than anybody else in the world. Okay. And so when we're talking about varietal honey, it's this category where we're trying to make a honey or get a honey from the hive that has one single nectar source, knowing that it's not going to be just that, but we'll try as best we can. And here's some famous ones or well-known ones. Tupelo is one, sourwood is one, fireweed, black locust or acacia, orange blossom, buckwheat, alfalfa, basswood, going international, Manuka from New Zealand, and cider from Yemen and those areas. Uh, those are some of the varieties. But if we just took every single tree, like tulip poplar, sometimes you'll get just almost a straight tulip poplar, and it's a varietal. Okay. All right. So that's what we're talking about when we're talking about varietal. So healthy bees, well, you just need a good population. A definition of healthy bees is a good population, queen right space allocation in the hive, um, high preparations before the flow. That really essentially means that you're keeping them healthy, managing swarming, managing the growth of the hive before you take them into this varietal situation. Okay. And I have the question there under queen right, or maybe not. There are a number of variations of honey production in terms of hive configurations, um, double queens, removing queens. There are techniques for boosting your honey production based on how you manage the colony. I'm not going to get into that, but just the core basic position you want to be in is I have healthy bees. And then if you want to start playing with the other variables to make you have more honey production, then you can do that as well. Just know that's a whole nother way of doing things that people have fun with. I do as well. By the way, the last thing there, calm bees. It's always better to have, at least to me, when you're working with a number of bees in these kind of stressful situations, especially when you're moving bees and that sort of thing. Um, Calm bees is a definite plus. All right. Location. After healthy bees, location is the number one determiner of can you make a varietal honey or are you going to make any honey at all? Okay. The first statement here is kind of like, duh, of course that's true, but it's worth reminding ourselves that there is nothing else can be in the honey except what is blooming within the forage radius of your hive. If you've heard me talk before, I talk about the life of your colony is dependent on that 2 to 3 mile radius uh, geography around your hive. Everything that goes on with your hive, its health, how much it's productive, the honey it produces, the kind of honey, all that is dependent on what's within that forage radius. So whatever is blooming in that forage radius is going to determine what's in the honey. Okay. Nothing else. You can't magically have something else in the honey. Okay. So how do I know what's blooming in the forage radius? Look, look around. This is one of the reasons for hive tracks. I have what's blooming in there. For me, with sourwood, I have trees that I look at, trees that I monitor. And even in kind of a transect going across North Carolina, there's a highway that I can drive down this highway and I can see the progression of the bloom from east to west, as well as from elevation, low elevation to higher elevation. Okay, so just observing, keeping records, watching the trees or the flowers or whatever. I've heard from some of my Australian friends that they have very interesting kind of honey flows that are not as regular. For a lot of us, especially in the US and in North Carolina, we have these very regular sort of honey flow cycles, blooming cycles. They're shifted a little bit by the weather and the climate, but in general, we have pretty regular patterns that we can get used to. In Australia, it's not that way. They go around looking at the eucalyptus or whatever the other things that are blooming to see when they're blooming and will move hives. I mentioned Yemen and some of these more deserty kind of places. They'll chase the rainy season or rain, right? So knowing what's blooming, when it's blooming, you need to just observe. And that second point there, local knowledge, other beekeepers, talk to people. If you're a new beekeeper, you're not going to have any of this knowledge of what's the cycle, what's it look like. You go through a couple of seasons, you'll automatically know some of that seasonality of when things bloom, when when they don't. And then thirdly, land use maps. There's lots of good information out there about what land looks like. What's the coverage? Is it fields? Is it forest? Is it built up? Satellite images, the Google satellite images are great. And then kind of layered on top of this is a lot of folks have either locally produced or like North Carolina has a blooming calendar, if you will, for what's blooming when. Hive Tracks has that built in. We have a basic version of that that says, hey, here's a list of plants that pollinator friendly plants or honeybee friendly plants that are blooming right now in your area. Now, of course, that has to be localized, but getting just a good idea, just look at the list and start saying, hey, do I recognize that plant? Do I recognize that? Is it blooming right now? And so coming up with this blooming calendar, I saw one circulating on the internet just this week that somebody had produced, and it's just grabbing from publicly available sources and sharing that, what's blooming when. So again, there's lots of information here to help you know for a particular location what's blooming, which is going to tell you what's going to go into your honey. So how do I get a varietal out of that? Well, you put your bees in a location with a particular bloom of what you want to get. Now, I don't know if any of you recognize this. It's not a honey that a lot of people like. It's canola or rapeseed, but it produces copious amounts of nectar and will fill up supers, fill up supers. Our Canadian friends, they make a lot of this. Okay. So if your bee flies out of its hive, the foragers go out and this is all they see for miles and miles and miles. This is what the honey's going to be in the hive, right? So again, that's the concept. Wherever your bees are, they're going to fly out. For me, on the left here is sourwood. And this year, the sourwood bloom was as big and expansive and as beautiful as I've ever seen it in the 20-ish years that I've been watching it and observing. Pretty much every tree that was a sourwood tree bloomed, and it bloomed pretty much top to bottom. Sourwood blooms are on the ends of the limbs, these little fingers that stick out, and sometimes maybe there's a few at the top. Maybe there's a few. This tree doesn't bloom. The tree next to it does bloom. But this year, I tell you what, every single tree bloomed top to bottom. It was just wild how much sourwood bloom there was, and it translated into good sourwood honey production. That's not always the case. At least here locally, we have black locust that will bloom beautiful, and then it won't have any nectar in it. So you can't always go on the bloom. The right-hand picture here, don't know if you recognize that or not, but that is Japanese knotweed, and this is just up the road from one of my sourwood yards. And so it's very, I'm not real happy about seeing this, but I did note that whenever I went by it, I looked to see if the bees were working it, and they did not prefer the Japanese knotweed. They preferred the sourwood. So again, this is one of those things that you have to deal with. All right. Here's another, this is a satellite image. This green band here, if you see Miller's Creek, Wilkesboro, Boone is up here on the left. This is a band of where good sourwood country is. Again, using the knowledge of where good sourwood is. Actually, the yard right there in the middle was one that my 70-year-old neighbor, when I moved here, he's since died. He would have been 90 something now, but he had a sourwood yard right there since the 1950s and let me use it. And I learned a lot of my sourwood from him. But again, he didn't have a satellite image. He just knew where the bees made sourwood. But now with the satellite image, we can see, why that was a good spot. All right. So you got healthy bees. You've got a location where things are going to bloom, you think, um, and a particular varietal of particular flower is going to bloom. And in our case, sourwood is the one, or basswood, or whatever. Okay, and let's stop right here for a moment. If we know that this area has sourwood trees in it, or basswood trees in it, or this has big fields of canola or sunflower or alfalfa or clover. Okay. How do we know nothing else is going to get in there mixed with it? We don't. Okay. And so that's where we have to pay attention. And for sourwood, thankfully, not much else blooms while it's blooming. That's the best case scenario is if the thing that you're going after, nothing else blooms during that window of when your hives are making that honey, then you can kind of by process of elimination, that's what it has to be. Okay. So sometimes that's the way it works. Like if you're in just big fields of agricultural fields and you're making that particular variety, then that's the only thing they have. So that's why they make that. All right. So when does this particular thing bloom and for how long? You need to know that. And clearly, you want your bees to be at that location at or before the varietal starts blooming. And how do I keep that honey separate from others? Well, for me, I add fresh supers right at the start of the flow. So I strip off all the old supers. In my case, I'm coming out of spring, so I'm pulling all the spring honey off. And I mean, I'm getting them all the way down. I run single deeps, so I'm getting them all the way down to a single. So I have to make sure that they have a little bit of honey in there or that the flow is coming quickly. Don't want them to starve. That has happened before, where not starved, but they were lighter coming out when you had a failed flow. So add fresh supers at the start. You want to get the bees again in there before, but not too far in advance so they don't get other honey in the supers. And then pull the honey, preferably right before the end of the flow. Sometimes you can't do that. It just makes pulling honey nicer if they're still going after some. Otherwise, you get robbing situations, and I ran into a couple of those this season, and they're no fun at all. Okay, and then after the flow, quite often there's a dearth that's getting ready to happen, or there's not much happening, and you've got a big field force in the colony, and so you need to be mindful of do they have enough food after the flow. All right. So timing, just a couple of pictures. This is kind of our old school way. I still do it this way. This is my son Sullivan, another son, which I noticed the one on the right has shorts on. Probably not a good idea. But this is, we move trailers, put the bees on the truck and the trailer and haul them to Sourwood. This is the newer version in North Carolina. A lot of folks have these specialized trailers that they stack the hives on and just pull them into the location and drop them there, super them up, and then pull them home with the honey, or they strip the honey off. But again, moving the hives in and out is a big part of the process. Speaking of processes, how does our normal beekeeping change if we're going after varietals? Well, if you're a hobby beekeeper at home and you're stationary, there's some things you can do. You're not moving bees, okay? But the things we're talking about pulling honey off and putting fresh supers on, those sorts of things are things you can do to even if at your localized place, you might get this varietal honey possibility, then you want to keep it separate. And a lot of the questions that I saw were, how do I keep this separate? And yeah, that's a challenge, and we'll talk about that as we go. So, what are the processes for varietals? Moving the bees, we talked about that. Supering methods. When do I add supers? How many do I add? Lots of different uh, thinking on that. Generally, though, the concept is you want to stay ahead of the honey production. You don't want them to start packing out a super and not have space for it. You're just leaving honey on the table or honey in the hive if that's happening. Queen excluders, there's lots of debate on that. We'll talk a little bit about that. I prefer queen excluders. And then really here's the one of the keys is monitoring the flow. How do we know, one, that it's starting, or two, that it is how's it going? Okay. And when's it over? Hive scales clearly is something that I use, or monitoring devices of the activity. So there's different ways of measuring, are they on a flow? Okay, scales is one way, activity at the entrance is another, or just actually going to the location. I mean, if it's at your house, you can clearly look at that if you're a hobbyist. For me, I've got several sourwood apiaries, and so I'm going to visit those periodically. And by inspections, I'm not going down in the hive at all. I'm popping the lids, looking to see if when they're making that honey. You'll see it in the flow. You'll see the fresh white wax. If you've seen big flows, you know what I'm talking about. Once you see the white edges on everything of the wax, you know it's on. And watching the bloom again with sourwood, you can see how far out the flowers have bloomed on these little fingers. And other flowers, you can do the same thing. Basswood has a similar pattern, just looking at the flowers, because flowers have a limited time of when they're blooming and producing nectar. Some are even time of day dependent, like buckwheat is generally a morning nectar flow. So in the afternoon, they might go work something else. And then you can talk to other beekeepers. I have a network of sourwood producers, and we're comparing notes and saying, this is, how's it going? What are you seeing? Elevation, how's it going at lower elevations versus higher elevations? All these sorts of things. And then finally, how do you harvest the honey at the end? Again, you want to preserve this varietal, this one source of honey. And so you want to make sure you keep it separated out. And again, there's a number of harvesting methods. I've used all of them under the sun. Uh, and again, some of that's just preference. Others, it might matter. All right. So again, here's a couple of pictures. Upper left, this is that white comb that I'm talking about. You can see this is even sourwood. You can see the little dusty brown color of the nectar in there. It's almost clear. Bottom left, you can see these are running singles with a queen excluder over the single. And then I threw in this one on the right. This is from one of my friends in Saskatchewan. This is on the prairies of Saskatchewan, where they'll run double deeps on the bottom, and then they will have, yes, those are literally honey supers stacked up on top of there, and they're full of honey, and they pull them more than once. So, and they have a queen excluder there. So, it's my example of saying a queen excluder does not inhibit, at least in their case, honey production. There are times where it's hard to get the bees to go across it, and there are things you can do to do that. But again, just a few examples. All right, so finally, let's get to we've got this honey. We put the bees, healthy bees, in the right place at the right time. We got the honey out. And now how do we validate that that's what it is? Well, documenting the time and the place of honey production, as I said already, determines what is going to be in that honey. Okay, so you have a limited set of choices of what can be in that honey based on the time and place. So right there, you already scoped down what the possibilities are. And our honey story feature, that's what it's trying to capture, is that origin birth story of the honey. Okay, and I think that's critical. If you know that, then you know a whole lot about that honey and can say a lot about it. Next is flavor profiles. Honey varietals have a particular flavor profile. Sourwood honey, if you've tasted it, it has its own unique flavor profile. Basswood has its own unique flavor profile. Clover has its own unique flavor profile. And we were talking before we started about the honey tasting with Marina and her class, and different folks are focusing more on what's the flavor profile, what's the taste. That to me is one of the biggest indicators of is this that particular varietal, and for sourwood in particular. And of course, I'm most of my experiences with that, but that is one of the big determining factors. And then lastly, I list lab tests. So lab tests get a lot of attention, and there's a variety of lab tests that are available, and I'm going to talk a little bit about them. We could have a whole webinar on lab tests and the pluses and minuses. What I will say is that a lab test will tell you something, a particular thing about the honey, okay? But it's not the source of truth in terms of what's in that honey. It will add to the truth about what's in that honey, but we can't and shouldn't depend entirely on the lab tests. And we can talk more about that. But again, here's on the bottom is a few screenshots. One is Marina and her honey tasting. Um, Again, back to this concept. Each nectar from each flower produces its own unique flavor profile, even its color, even its viscosity. Sourwood honey is actually very thin. You would almost think that it's you know too moist. It's too watery. It comes out of the combs super easy, and but its moisture is good. But it's just a thinner honey than some of the others that we get. Um, and so the flavor profile again is something that I like to emphasize. And then again, there's lab tests. Lab tests can do tests for contaminants. Okay, that's one whole slew of kind of lab tests. And then there's ones that begin to look at either pollen that is in the honey, like your pollen analysis, which is sort of a complementary component to the nectar that's in there. As the bees are gathering the nectar, they're getting some pollen grains that get into the honey as well. And then DNA analysis actually covers any kind of material that touches that honey or gets in there, and that's anything in the environment. And then NMR is another technique that you need a source of truth to compare to with the NMR. So that one, if you get a good library of profiles of particular honey varieties that you trust and believe, then you can use the NMR. So again, they all have their own pluses and minuses, and I would just suggest we don't use them for what they're not intended for. Use them to complement what we already know about honey. All right, so that was fast, I think. But it's a good overview of kind of the whole process. We'll talk more as we go into the questions if you want. But what are some of the risks or challenges that you might run into with varietal honey production? And again, this is not unique to varietal honey production, but it has a bigger impact because you're focusing on this one single source. Weather is huge. If you get into a bad weather pattern during the time when those flowers are blooming, you can't recover. I mean, you can't go back and get a day when the nectar was there, but the bees weren't able to get to it. Okay. So weather to me is one of the biggest risks. And then no flow or low flow. So if you're counting on the bees making honey in this particular place, and either that nectar source, the flowers don't bloom or there's not nectar in it, then you've got to pay attention to the food stores of your hives. I've had one season, one out of almost 20 years of chasing sourwood, where the bees came out lighter than they went in. Okay, so where they did not make anything, and I had to, it was almost a disaster. Um, but that's kind of the exception, but it is definitely something to think about. And then predators, bears, for us in particular, is a big challenge. And then this fourth point, other nectar sources, is becoming more and more of an issue. Um, where my sourwood locations are, there are Japanese knotweed is coming in, mimosa is coming in, there's Tree of Heaven, and then there's some other kind of not invasives, but that are on the edge of it. Like basswood can get some sourwood is mixed with basswood in some areas. I know Bob Benny has issues with that sometimes where his are. Um, and then sumac and chestnut, they bloom on the ends of the sourwood bloom. So again, you just got to pay attention to what's happening there. And then you're always going to have some dud hives. No matter how many hives you take, some of them are just going to go queenless, or they're going to swarm, or something's going to go wrong. So just count on, if you're taking hives into make varietal, some of them are not going to work. All right. So here's just a couple of pictures. You're obviously when you're doing this, you're going to look at radars, look at weather. And these are a couple on the left and the right are just storms that come through. The one in the middle, this was on June 25th. This was from last year. It was 48 degrees. We had this huge, shift in weather right in the middle of the sourwood season, and that's generally not a good idea or not helpful. And so anyway, weather is to me is one of the biggest issues. And this year, people were concerned about drought. And I'll just say with sourwood, one of my best seasons ever before this year. I don't think this year was the best ever. It was close. Um, but one of my best season ever was during a drought. So to me, that flying time and being able to go out and get the nectar was more important than rain for sourwood nectar. Now, other sources like clover, clearly they need the rain to help them bloom and have nectar. But for sourwood, the drier the better. All right, and so just quickly now, harvest record. We've gone over this before. Um, Whenever you harvest your honey in hive tracks, there's multiple options depending on how you harvest. Uh, make that record. I do one as I said, I do one in the yard, and then I do one when I get the final amount. I go back and update that record just to give myself a more accurate amount. We do estimate based on what, if you say I harvested a medium super of honey, then we're going to give you an estimate of how many pounds that was, or kilos, or whatever units you want. But if you want more accurate, you can go back and add that in. And then, of course, there's a section for noting what was foraged. So if you're going after a varietal, make sure you put that in there. And that's what that looks like. All right. So before we go to Q&A, here are a couple of examples. If you've got your phone, you can hit that one in the upper right. Now, if you've been paying attention in North Carolina, this purple honey viral thing, that I don't consider this a varietal. I think it more of just a happy accident for folks that are getting this purple honey. It is a bit of a mystery. So again, the homespun honey, North Carolina, are some beekeepers I've become friends with. I'm helping them get sourwood honey, and when they brought their bees to sourwood, when we were stripping the honey off, uh, you know, to get them clean, there was some purple honey dots in one of the supers, and they were like, oh no, there's some purple honey happening somewhere. Well, they went home and some of their other hives had some purple honey, and they've got a nice little harvest of purple honey, and they used the Hive Tracks honey story to document that. So I thought that was a great use of it. The other QR code here is for the Sourwood Faith Mountain Farm sourwood out of my lower deep gap yard is what I call it. That's my long time best yard. So hit those QR codes to look at a couple of examples there. But the purple honey thing in North Carolina is super interesting. People are just going crazy over it in terms of wanting to buy it and find it and get it. And yeah, we'll see how that goes. I think some of them are hoping to send some off this year to do some analysis. Uh, be fascinating to see what that comes back with. All right, so let me go. Let's go to chat for a minute. Um, Anybody got additional questions that you want to ask, or I'll just go with the Q&A here. All right, Franco, you let me know if y'all drop questions in the chat if something else has come up while we've been talking. All right.
One question just came in from Denise. Why do you use single dips?
That's a whole nother webinar. No. Uh, no, there's the reason I use single deeps is what I found is especially if I went double deeps, a bunch of my honey gets captured in that first deep. I mean, the second deep up, and so I'm losing some of my production, and Ian Stepler, I think, out of Canada, kind of popularized this single deep honey production several years ago, and we've been doing it I don't know, almost 10 years now as well, and there's multiple reasons besides just the honey production. but they're just easier to manage and in terms of finding queens and the size of them, that sort of thing. But there's a whole sort of subculture of single deep management and what you have to do. I'm not exclusively single deep, but when I go into sourwood, generally they're going to be single deep. I'll go to a 1.5, meaning a one and a shallow or a medium if in some circumstances. But recently I've been under supering those. I've been putting the shallow or the medium under the deep. That's mostly to help with splitting, makes it easier to split out of the deep on top. All right, so the first few questions here are about how do we make sure the honey is capped? What about moisture? Um, and when should I harvest? Okay, so all those questions about the honey itself. And one, you need a refractometer, right, just to measure the moisture. And I did do some experimenting. I mean, pull some honey out or take some honey out of a frame, test the moisture right there in the yard. I mean, you can do that. Um, and so I've been experimenting with pulling some honey earlier than I normally would. I think it's a bit we get too caught up in it has to be capped. I don't think it does in terms of having the right moisture. The bees are getting it down, and they'll take it below the appropriate percentage even before they cap it. So you can catch it before they cap it. It's actually easier to extract if it's not fully capped. The other thing you can do is if you've never shaken a frame, okay, the commercial guys do this a lot. The bigger beekeepers just to see how the flow is going. So if you go into a yard or go into your hive and they're making honey, if you pull one of those frames out and you shake it, turn it, you know, point it down and shake it, if that if it just drips out, if it just comes out like water, then that's fresh nectar. That's going to be too wet to take. If you do that and it doesn't come out at all, then you're getting close to being okay to harvest it. Okay. And some folks have dehumidifiers like in there. I have one in my honey room just to keep the moisture because it will absorb moisture, as you know. The honey is hygroscopic. So if you expose it to moisture, it will absorb moisture until it gets above the the threshold. So you want to keep it dry, and that same process will actually help dry out some of the honey as well. If you have it, if it's not quite dry enough, folks do all sorts of things to help dry it out. Um, and then so that's as far as capping. You don't necessarily need to persuade them to cap it. They will eventually, but sometimes it's too long. They'll start consuming it way before then. And again, if you're making varietal honey, you want to get that honey off as soon as you can. I didn't make this point as well, but if I go and look at those graphs of the sourwood honey production, it goes way up, and then they very quickly start consuming. Now, whether they consume the sourwood or something down lower that's not sourwood, I don't know. But if I see pounds going off, all I'm seeing is my sourwood, you know, not going in my jar, and going to the consumer. So you want to get that honey off as soon as you can. How to get bees to use your honey supers? If there's a honey flow, they will use them. I mean that's kind of a strong nectar flow cures all ills. Even if you have kind of a puny hive, if they're on a nectar flow, it just boosts everybody up. Um, and when should I harvest my honey? Well, whenever you want. uh, is an answer, but you can harvest it as soon as it's ready. I mean, as soon as they make some, you can pull it out. Even if you're a hobbyist and they've made a few frames of honey, just pull one of the frames out in the middle and eat it, enjoy it, harvest it. Um, Already answered that one. Definitely a move for varietals. All right, next page. I told you we had a lot of these, so keep putting some in the chat if you got them. Um, oh, this first question. I love this one. I'm going to break this myth. Okay. New beekeeper, two young, strong hives, cannot collect any honey from them. Absolutely. Um, I know the going mantra is first year hive. Oh, you can't take any honey. So All of those hives in that sourwood yard, the lower deep gap sourwood yard I showed you, those were all packages that I started this year. I'm going to make over 1,000 pounds of sourwood honey from just packages. Okay, so yes, you can collect honey. How can I tell what type of honey is in each frame? Well, good question. Taste it. Um, the color of it, okay, what it should be, what you can expect. And I don't know if you can go frame by frame, although I will say when we're in for sourwood production, sometimes we're having to taste if something starts getting mixed in and we notice it, then we'll start tasting the frames. Okay. Um, and just validating it's a tedious, really difficult process and you get way tired of tasting. But yeah, that's the way to taste is the way to know. Okay. Um, okay. Next one is flow hive question. Um, I have a good relationship with the flow folks. And yeah, they work. It your question here is one of the biggest challenges, and I would go to them and ask on their forums and things. What I think what you're doing is right. To get the bees there. But what I did notice was that you have two deeps before you're putting the flow super on. Think about dropping it down to make that flow be closer to the brood nest. I think that will be helpful there. All right. Okay, we got about 5 more minutes. Let's see. What, when, and how to feed bees. That's a whole nother webinar as well. Lots of resources out there. My simple answer to that is when they need it. Okay. Um, and when they need it, feed them sugar. How there's multiple ways of delivering that to them. Lots of resources out there. Um, this next one, good question. I don't know. I think actually all honeys are multifloral. As I said, we call them varietals, but they're not really, unless you're in the middle of miles of canola or the almond orchards with no other nectar source in sight. And actually, that's a good point. If there is no other variety, then they're not going to have the variety. Okay, so that's why the variety of forage is healthier for the bees. Fireweed, I'm not familiar with fireweed enough to know. I will say though, with sourwood color can vary according to region a little bit. I'm not sure if it's just there's some other things mixing in the other places, or if it's the nectar itself. But I do have more southern mountains of North Carolina. I've seen some of their sourwood, and it's not as the same color as mine. Mine's sort of a dusty brown color, um, and theirs has a little more amber in it. Same with a friend of mine over in central Tennessee on the Cumberland Plateau. They'll make some sourwood there, but it's a little different color than mine. Um, how many varietal honeys? As I said, there's a lot of different ones in the U.S. You can't guarantee the honey is correctly labeled. That is dependent on the beekeeper and their integrity or just their knowledge that this is what they're saying it is. And there are again some lab tests confirm it's actually that type of honey. Even those tests, some of those are have challenges with them. But just the whole honey labeling and honey authenticity is a big issue. It's been an issue. It will continue to be an issue. Our honey story is an attempt to help add information, if you will, to that conversation. All right. Why is your honey in Alexandria, Virginia so dark? I'm guessing it's tulip poplar is why it's so dark. Um, Pretty much East Coast spring honey. If you get tulip poplar, which a lot of places have tulip poplar, it's super dark. Um, or it could be chestnut. I got some chestnut honey that was super dark. And then finally, how to keep varieties separate. Again, we talked a little bit about that. When you pull the honey, separating out frame by frame, um, kind of the best advice there. All right. Hope y'all been having fun. Just to remind you of some features that we talked about last time. The AI voice inspection. I think everybody on Pro should have that now. If you don't have it, whether you're pro or not, you can request access to have AI voice inspection. That's something we introduced this spring. Reminder that we have QR codes, identifier for a hive you can use, and then we've got this new sharing feature that you can, a simplified sharing feature that you can use. We've got a gift for you if you want to. Well, you can try Pro for free, as I said, or if you want to go ahead and pay for it, Pro 2026 is a coupon code you can use as well. Next month, Tuesday, August 25th, 11 a.m., I would assume. I'm rolling around the topics right now in my head, so any suggestions you have, drop them in the chat, send us an email, send Franco uh, a message. I think that's it. Man, I've been talking fast and long. Any final questions out there, folks? Or suggestions for topics of future webinars, whether it's next month or not? What you got for me? Does works only in English? Okay, we'll have to work on that one, Franco.
Yes, yes. It works only in English for now, but it's a beta version. We're gonna improve it in the future.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, everybody. Hope you all have a great rest of your day, and
Sorry,
we'll see.
James.
Yeah.
Mickey had a question and he asked it for the second time about your
Okay.
method for bear protection.
Oh, electric fence. Yeah,
Okay.
that's the solution, and those don't always work, but they work. Our Canadian folks, friends, have very large bears that their fences work. So if your fence is not working for a black bear, it means that it's your fence and not the bear. I just picked up a hive yesterday that was flipped over by a bear. And straps, put them on a, if you strap them, uh that'll save some of them. Yeah. Thanks for that. Yeah, Dr. T. Yeah, I Beam On is looking good. All right. Thanks everybody. Bye y'all.
And bye, everyone. Thank you.